The
Listen,
fluorescent lights
we
of
need to
St.
operate now.
Augustine Regional Medical Center
You
hummed
could
with their
die.
usual sterile indifference. But on the fourth floor in the secure trauma wing that the night shift nurses had nicknamed the cage, the air carried a different weight. It crackled with violence. It reeked of desperation. And beneath the antiseptic smell of bleach and bandages, there lingered something older, something primal. The scent of a wounded animal that had not yet decided whether to die or to kill. Meredith Callahan stood at the elevator doors, her worn scrubs slightly faded from too many washes, her brown hair pulled back in a functional ponytail. She carried a thermos of black coffee like a soldier carries a rifle, not for comfort, for survival. At 34 years old, she had the kind of face that people forgot easily, plain, unremarkable. The face of a woman who had learned long ago that invisibility was a form of protection. She had not ended up at St. Augustine by accident. For 3 years, ever since that night on Highway 61, Meredith had been tracking, searching, waiting. She had left her job as a dispatcher and trained as a nurse, moving from hospital to hospital across Montana, always watching the admission logs for one name, one face, the man whose voice had haunted her dreams for 1,000 nights. When she saw that Gideon Thorne had been admitted to St. Augustine after a suspicious hit and run, she had called in every favor she had, transferred within 48 hours. And now here she was standing in the elevator of the hospital where the man she had failed was fighting for his life. She checked her watch, 7 o'clock. The night shift was beginning, and somewhere on this floor a man was screaming. The sound reached her before the elevator doors fully opened. It was not the cry of a patient in physical pain. Meredith had heard plenty of those in her years of nursing. This was different. This was the howl of a man trapped inside his own skull, fighting enemies that no one else could see. She stepped onto the floor and walked toward the nurse's station. Through the reinforced glass window of room 402, she could see him. He was enormous. Even wasted by weeks of infection and blood loss, his frame dominated the hospital bed. His body was a roadmap of violence. Scars crisscrossed his arms and chest. Fresh sutures ran down his torso like railroad tracks. His head was shaved close, revealing more scars along his scalp. And his eyes. His eyes were wide-open pupils dilated to black saucers, seeing things that existed only in the hell inside his mind. He was thrashing against the leather restraints, screaming orders to men who were no longer there. "Contact left! Get down! Get down, damn it!" The metal bed frame rattled against the floor bolts. A monitor shrieked its alarm. Two nurses huddled behind the station desk, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. "You're the agency nurse," one of them asked without looking up. Her name tag read Dolores Quinn, head nurse. She was a heavy-set woman in her mid-50s with glasses that had slipped down her nose and eyes that had seen too much. "Meredith Callahan," she replied, "transferred from Mercy General." "You picked a hell of a night to start." Dolores gestured toward the window. "That's Gideon Thorne, road captain of some motorcycle club out of Billings. Came in 3 days ago after a hit and run on Highway 61. Shattered leg, internal bleeding, sepsis setting in. But the real problem is up here." She tapped her temple. "Severe PTSD. He thinks he's still on that highway. Thinks we're the enemy." "Has anyone tried talking to him?" Dolores laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Honey, we had a psychiatrist with 30 years of experience go in there yesterday. Thorne threw a bedpan at his head. The man needed 6 stitches. She shook her head. "We've maxed out the sedatives. His body burns through them like water. Dr. Cole is coming in an hour to put him in a medically induced coma. It's the only option left." Meredith stared through the glass. The man on the bed was still screaming, still fighting his invisible war. But she was not looking at his wounds or his restraints or his wild eyes. She was looking at his face, and her blood turned to ice. She knew that face. She had never seen it in person. But she knew it. She knew it the way a person knows the face of someone they have wronged, the way a murderer knows the face of their victim. Gideon Thorne. The name had haunted her for 3 years. It had followed her from one city to another, from one job to another. It had whispered to her in the dark hours before dawn, when sleep refused to come and the memories came instead. She had told herself she would find him someday. She had told herself that when she did, she would make things right. And now here he was, the man she had failed. The man whose friends had died because of her cowardice. He was lying in a hospital bed 50 feet away, screaming himself to death. "I'll take his room," Meredith said. The words came out before she could stop them. Dolores turned to look at her eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Excuse me, I'll sit with him. I'll try to calm him down." "Did you not hear what I just said? He put a man in the emergency room. He's not a patient anymore. He's a weapon. If you put him in a coma, you trap him in the nightmare," Meredith said. Her voice was steady, but her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "He's not fighting you. He's fighting something that happened to him. If you sedate him, he stays there forever. He needs someone to bring him back." Dolores stared at her with narrowed eyes. Then she shook her head and turned back to her paperwork. "Fine. Sign the liability waiver. If he kills you, it's on your own head." She slid a form across the desk. "Security is 30 seconds out. Don't be a hero." Meredith signed the form without reading it. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves and tied a plastic isolation gown over her scrubs. Then she walked toward room 402. The door was heavy, reinforced with steel. She swiped her badge on the reader. The magnetic lock clicked. Disengaged. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit her first. Sweat, blood, the metallic tang of infection, the sharp bite of rubbing alcohol, and beneath it all, the sour stench of fear. Not her fear, his. The screaming stopped. Gideon Thorne's head snapped toward her with the speed of a predator. His eyes locked onto her face. In that moment, he did not see a nurse. He did not see a woman in scrubs carrying medical supplies. He saw an enemy entering his kill zone. "Contact front," he rasped. His voice was shredded, torn, raw from hours of screaming. He lunged against the restraints, the veins in his neck standing out like cables. "Get back! Get back!" Meredith held her ground. She kept her hands at her sides, palms open but low. Her posture was not defensive. It was attentive, respectful. She had learned a long time ago that wounded animals could sense fear. They could smell it, and they would attack it. "Gideon," she said. Her voice was low and flat, authoritative, not the soothing, high-pitched tone that medical staff use for children. This was the voice of someone who expected to be heard. "Stay back," he roared. A fresh trickle of blood ran down his wrist where the restraint was cutting into his skin. His eyes darted around the room, tracking threats that only he could see. "They're coming through the trees. Wrench, wrench, get down." Meredith's chest tightened. Wrench, the name was a knife sliding between her ribs. She took a step forward. "Don't," Gideon screamed. He yanked his arm so hard that the leather strap groaned. "I'll kill you. I swear to God, I'll kill you." She kept walking, slow, deliberate, closing the distance between them with the measured pace of someone who had made a decision and would not be turned from it. He swung at her. His right hand had partially worked free from the restraint, and he grabbed a heavy plastic water pitcher from the side table and hurled it at her head. It was a clumsy blow weakened by fever and exhaustion, but it still carried the desperate strength of a dying man. The pitcher smashed into her shoulder. Pain exploded down her arm, sharp and bruising. She would have a purple mark there by morning. She absorbed the impact without breaking stride. She stepped right up to the bed rail, and then she leaned down, her face inches from his. She could smell the sickness on his breath, feel the heat radiating off his fevered skin. His wild eyes were locked onto hers, filled with confusion and rage, and a terror so profound it was almost childlike. She brought her lips close to his ear, and she whispered 5 words. "Highway 61, wrenches down." The effect was instantaneous. It was as if someone had cut the strings of a marionette. The tension drained from his body, his arm dropped. His eyes, which had been darting around the room in a frenzy, locked onto hers with a sudden terrifying focus. The heart monitor slowed its frantic beeping. Neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. The room fell quiet except for the distant hum of machines and the soft whisper of the ventilation system. Then Gideon Thorne spoke. His voice was a broken whisper, rough with disuse and disbelief. "Who are you?" Meredith reached down and gently loosened the restraint that was cutting into his wrist. He watched her hands, studying them with the analytical intensity of a man who had spent his life reading threats in the smallest movements. "My name is Meredith Callahan," she said quietly. "I'm a nurse here, and I need you to let me work Gideon. The infection is winning. If we don't get the antibiotics into you in the next hour, you'll go into septic shock. He blinked. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The hallucinations, the fire and smoke, and screaming men seemed to recede, replaced by the harsh fluorescent reality of the hospital room. You said the words, he whispered. You said Highway 61. You said wrench. I did. Nobody knows those words. Nobody except the brothers who were there. Meredith stopped. She held the IV needle in her hand, looking at him. The weight of 3 years pressed down on her shoulders like a physical force. I was there, she said. Gideon's breath hitched. I wasn't on the road with you, she continued. Her voice trembled slightly, and she hated herself for it. But I was there. I was the voice on the phone. I was the 911 dispatcher who took your call that night. I talked to you for 2 hours while you waited for help. I was the one who told you to keep pressure on Wrench's wounds. I was the one who heard you singing to him when he died. The room became a vacuum, no sound, no movement, just two people suspended in a moment that had been 3 years in the making. Gideon stared at her. His eyes were no longer wild. They were sharp, focused. The eyes of a man who was suddenly terrifyingly awake. I thought I imagined you, he said slowly. I thought you were just my brain trying to comfort me while I bled out. I stayed on the line for 4 hours, Meredith said. A single tear escaped and tracked down her cheek. She let it fall. Even after your phone went dead, even after they told me to switch frequencies, I kept talking, just in case you could hear me. She met his gaze without flinching. My name is Meredith Callahan, and I've been carrying your voice in my head for 3 years. I've been searching for you ever since. When I saw your name on the admission list, I transferred here within 2 days. I had to find you. I had to make things right. Outside the glass window, Dolores Quinn watched with her jaw hanging open. The monster in room 402 was holding out his arm, letting the nurse insert an IV. His face was calm, peaceful even, like a man who had just woken from a very long nightmare. What the hell did she say to him? Dolores whispered. No one answered. No one knew. For the next 3 hours, Meredith worked in silence. She changed his dressings, packing gauze into the deep tissue wounds on his thigh. She adjusted his medication, fighting the infection with a precision that came from years of experience. She checked his vitals every 15 minutes while watching the numbers slowly stabilize. Gideon did not speak. He stared at the ceiling, grinding his teeth against the pain, but he let her work without resistance. Around 2 in the morning, the fever broke. His temperature dropped from 104 to 100.5. He was lucid for the first time in days. Water, he croaked. Meredith was there instantly, holding a cup with a straw to his lips. Slowly, she said, you'll make yourself sick. He drank, his eyes tracking her face. Now that the delirium had faded, he was studying her with the analytical intensity she had seen before. He was looking for threats, for tells, for lies. You're not just a nurse, he said. I am a nurse, licensed in 3 states. But you weren't always. Meredith pulled up a stool and sat down. The hospital was quiet now, sunk into the deep stillness of the graveyard shift. Through the window, she could see the distant lights of the parking lot, the empty stretch of highway beyond. No, she said, I wasn't always. Tell me. She took a breath. This was the moment she had dreaded for 3 years. The moment of confession. The moment when the truth which she had buried so deep inside herself would finally claw its way into the light. Before I was a nurse, I was a 911 dispatcher, she said. I worked the night shift at the county emergency call center. I was good at it. I could stay calm when people were screaming. I could guide them through the worst moments of their lives. I thought I was saving people. She paused. Her hands were trembling in her lap. And then came the night of March 15th, 3 years ago. I was working alone. It was a slow night. Around 2 a.m. a call came in. A man's voice, frantic. He said there had been an accident on Highway 61. Multiple injuries. He said his friend was bleeding out. Gideon's jaw tightened. His eyes never left her face. That was you, Meredith said. I didn't know your name then. I just knew your voice. And I knew that you were terrified. She remembered it all. The static on the line. The sound of his breathing ragged and desperate. The background noise of wind and distant engines and the wet gurgling sound of a man choking on his own blood. I followed protocol. I dispatched an ambulance. I kept you on the line. I talked you through the first aid. I told you to keep pressure on the wound to elevate his legs to keep him talking. You told me to sing to him, Gideon said. His voice was rough. You said it would keep him calm. I remember. I sang Simple Man. It was his favorite song. Meredith nodded. She remembered that too. She remembered the sound of Gideon's broken voice singing the lyrics through tears and blood while his best friend died in his arms. The ambulance should have arrived in 20 minutes, she said. Highway 61 is remote, but we had units in the area. I confirmed the dispatch. I watched the GPS. They were on their way. She stopped. The next words were the hardest she had ever spoken. And then my supervisor came in. Gideon's eyes narrowed. His name was Harold Vickers. He was a 20-year veteran of the department. He said there was a problem with the dispatch. He said we needed to verify the coordinates before we could send the ambulance into an active scene. He said there were reports of gang activity on that stretch of highway, and we couldn't risk our responders. That's insane, Gideon growled. We weren't a gang. We were 5 guys on motorcycles. I know. I told him that. I told him I had a man dying on the line, and we needed to move. But he pulled rank. He said we had to wait for confirmation. And her voice broke. I listened to him. I was 27 years old. I was scared of losing my job. I was scared of making a mistake. So I did what I was told. I waited. And while I waited, while I sat there following orders, your friend bled to death. Gideon's face had gone pale. His hands, which had been resting at his sides, were now clenched into fists. 47 minutes, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. The ambulance was 47 minutes late. Wrench died in my arms. 2 other brothers died on the pavement. The EMTs said if they had arrived on time, they might have saved them. I know. You killed them. The words hit her like a physical blow. She absorbed them without looking away. Yes, she said. I killed them. I obeyed an order I knew was wrong, and 3 men died because of my cowardice. Gideon's fists tightened. His body tensed, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Part of him wanted to strangle her. Part of him wanted to thank her for being honest. But he stayed still. He just stared at her with those sharp, haunted eyes. Why are you here? He asked. Why now? Why tell me this? Because someone is trying to kill you, Gideon. And I think it's connected to that night. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a pharmacy order stamped with the hospital's logo. She unfolded it and held it up for him to see. This was ordered for you 6 hours ago. Look at the potassium chloride dosage. Gideon squinted at the numbers. His expression changed. That would stop my heart. Exactly, and the doctor who signed this order doesn't exist in the hospital registry. I checked. She tucked the paper away. Her eyes met his. That accident 3 years ago wasn't an accident, was it? Gideon was quiet. Then slowly he shook his head. We were riding back from a run. 5 of us, Highway 61 at 2 a.m. We came around a bend and saw a truck parked on the shoulder. Big 18-wheeler, Blackwood freight, it is said on the side. He closed his eyes, remembering. There were men with the truck. They were unloading something into a van. We should have kept riding, should have minded our own business. But Wrench, he saw something. He said there was a woman in the van, said she looked scared. Meredith leaned forward. We slowed down to get a better look. That's when they turned on the headlights. High beams right in our eyes. And then the truck moved. It came right at us. Ran us off the road. His voice hardened. It wasn't an accident. It was a hit. They wanted us dead because we saw something we weren't supposed to see. The truck, Meredith said. Blackwood Freight. Do you remember the license plate? BFT 7829. I'll remember that number until the day I die. She nodded slowly. The pieces were falling into place. 3 years of guilt and confusion were finally forming a picture. The man who delayed my ambulance, she said. Harold Vickers. He retired 6 months after that night. Full pension, a generous severance package. He bought a house in Florida 3 times what he could have afforded on a dispatcher's salary. Gideon's eyes widened. Someone paid him. Someone paid him to let your friends die. And now 3 years later, you're in a hospital bed with a mystery doctor trying to inject you with poison. She leaned closer. You're the last witness, Gideon. The other survivors from that night. What happened to them? His face went gray. Boone Sutton. They called him Deacon. He made it out with a broken arm. He's been looking over his shoulder ever since. Paranoid. Drinking too much. Last I heard, he was holed up in some cabin in Wyoming. Anyone else? Just me. Meredith stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot below. The night was dark and empty, but somewhere out there in the shadows, people were watching. People who wanted this man dead. I spent 3 years running from what I did, she said quietly. I changed jobs, changed cities. I went back to school and became a nurse because I thought maybe I could save lives instead of losing them. I thought I could outrun the guilt. She turned to face him. But you can't outrun the dead. They follow you, they wait, and eventually they bring you right back to where you started. She walked to the supply closet and pulled out a heavy black zippered bag. She set it on the bed. Gideon looked at it, his face paled. Is that what I think it is, body bag? Meredith said. It's the only way out of this ward without a security clearance scan. The morgue elevator doesn't require a badge swipe for the basement levels. The orderlies use it to transport deceased patients. We have a 20-minute window before the night shift does their rounds. You want me to ride out in a body bag? I want you to survive the night. What happens after that is up to you. Gideon stared at her. Then slowly a grim smile crossed his face. Lady, I've done a lot of crazy things in my life, but this might be the craziest. Is that a yes? It's a yes. Getting a 200-pound man with a shattered leg and recovering sepsis into a body bag was a nightmare of logistics and pain. Gideon suppressed a scream as Meredith shifted his weight, guiding his movements with professional efficiency. His vision grayed out and he had to grip the bed rail to keep from passing out. Breathe, she commanded. Don't think about what's happening. Go somewhere else in your head. The only good place in my head is a bar in San Diego, he grunted through gritted teeth. Then go there. And when this is over, I'll buy the first round. She zipped the bag up to his chest. Stay absolutely silent, she said. If you cough, if you groan, we're done. She zipped it shut. Darkness swallowed him. The smell of plastic and chemical disinfectant was overwhelming. He felt the lurch as she lifted the gurney and unlocked the wheels. The journey down the hallway was a symphony of terrifying sounds magnified by the darkness of the bag. The squeak of the gurney wheels, the distant murmur of voices, the hum of fluorescent lights. Heading out, Dolores, Meredith called. Taking the body down, the head nurse replied, grabbing supplies on the way back. All right. Hey, is he finally sleeping? The monster. Out like a light. The fever broke. Thank God. Maybe we'll have a quiet rest of the shift. The gurney kept moving. The sounds of the ward faded, replaced by the hollow echo of the elevator lobby. Gideon felt the vibration of the button being pressed. The ding of arrival was as loud as a gunshot. They rolled in. The doors slid shut. The sensation of descending was nauseating, trapped in the dark with only the sound of his own breathing for company. The doors opened. The air temperature dropped 10 degrees. The morgue. Clear, Meredith whispered, unzipping the bag just enough for him to breathe fresh air. Gideon gasped, gulping down the cool, sterile air. That was the longest 3 minutes of my life. We're not done yet. The hearse is waiting at the loading bay. My contact left it unlocked. She pushed the gurney through the dim basement corridors. The morgue was empty at this hour, the stainless steel tables gleaming under low emergency lighting. The air smelled of formaldehyde and cold metal. They reached the loading bay. A black transport van was backed up to the ramp, its engine off, its windows dark. Meredith moved to open the back doors, and then a shadow detached itself from the pillar beside the driver's side. You're off shift early, Miss Callahan. The voice was smooth, cultured, utterly devoid of warmth. Meredith froze. Her hand went instinctively to her pocket where she had hidden a scalpel from the surgical tray. A man stepped into the light. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair and a handsome face that had probably graced magazine covers in his youth. He wore a suit that cost more than Meredith's car. His smile was charming. His eyes were dead. And it seems you're stealing hospital property, he said, nodding toward the body bag on the gurney. Mr. Thorne is a very expensive patient. We can't have him wandering off. From inside the bag, Gideon's voice was muffled but unmistakable. Blackwood, Warren Blackwood's smile widened. You remember me? I'm flattered. Though I must admit, I was hoping the sepsis would have scrambled your brains by now. This would all be so much simpler if you had just died quietly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a silenced pistol. He aimed it at Meredith's chest. Step away from the gurney, Miss Callahan. I know exactly who you are. Former 911 dispatcher now playing nurse. You've been carrying guilt for 3 years and you thought this was your chance to make amends. Very touching, very stupid. He gestured with the gun. Here's how this works. You walk away now, disappear, live your little life. No one will come after you. You're nobody. But if you try to play hero, you become another tragic suicide in the hospital parking lot. Young nurse overwhelmed by stress takes her own life. It happens all the time. Meredith stood perfectly still. She looked at the gun. She looked at Warren Blackwood's dead eyes. And she made a decision. You're right, she said. I am a nobody. I'm a nurse who makes $12 an hour and drives a car with 200,000 miles on it. I'm not a hero. I'm not brave. She took a step toward him. But I've spent 3 years living with the sound of a man singing to his dying friend. I've spent 3 years hearing his voice every time I close my eyes. And I am done running from it. She raised her left hand. In it, she held a small black remote, the kind used to open garage doors. This is connected to the hospital's main oxygen feed, she said. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. I rigged a shaped charge to the valve using cleaning supplies and a defibrillator battery. Basic chemistry. Anyone with internet access can learn it. Blackwood's smile faltered. You fire that gun, my thumb slips. This entire basement becomes a fireball. You, me, Mr. Thorne, and half the hospital above us. Everyone dies. You're bluffing. Maybe. But are you willing to bet your life on it? The standoff stretched like a wire about to snap. Blackwood's eyes flickered to the remote, calculating probabilities, weighing risks. And in that moment of hesitation, Gideon Thorne moved. He had worked his injured leg free from the bag. Ignoring the screaming agony of his torn muscles, he kicked the gurney's brake release. The heavy steel table lurched forward, slamming into Blackwood's knees. The gun went off. The bullet shattered the rear window of the van. Blackwood buckled, stumbling backward. Meredith grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from the rack beside her and swung it with every ounce of strength in her body. The tank connected with Blackwood's temple with a sickening crunch. He collapsed to the concrete floor unconscious. Jesus Christ, Gideon breathed, struggling to unzip the rest of the bag. Did you really rig the hospital to explode? Meredith looked at the remote in her hand. It was a garage door opener she had found in the van's glove compartment. No, she said, but he didn't know that. She held on him out of the bag and into the back of the van. His leg was bleeding again. The stitches torn, but he was alive. That was what mattered. We need to move, she said. He's not alone. There will be others. Where are we going? Meredith climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Somewhere they won't find us. Somewhere off the grid. She pulled out of the loading bay and into the night. In the rearview mirror, she could see the lights of the hospital growing smaller and smaller. Behind those walls, Warren Blackwood lay unconscious on a cold concrete floor, his empire beginning to crumble. But this was only the beginning. The real battle was still to come. As they drove into the darkness, Gideon's voice came from the back of the van, weak, exhausted, but alive. Hey, Meredith. Yeah, that bar in San Diego. When this is over, you're buying the first round. She allowed herself a small smile. Deal. The road stretched out before them, empty and endless. The mountains loomed on the horizon, dark shapes against a darker sky. Somewhere behind them, a wounded predator was waking up, and the hunt was about to begin. But for now, in this moment, they were free. They were alive. And Meredith Callahan, for the first time in 3 years, felt something other than guilt. She felt hope. The cabin had no name. It existed on no official maps. It sat at the end of a gravel road that wound through 12 miles of dense Montana forest, where the pines grew so thick that sunlight became a memory and the silence pressed against your eardrums like a physical weight. Meredith's father had built it with his own hands in 1987. He had been a different kind of man back then, a firefighter, a husband, a father who taught his daughter to fish and shoot and read the weather in the shape of clouds. The cancer had taken him slowly over the course of 3 years, and when he finally died, Meredith had inherited nothing but this cabin and a lifetime of memories she could not bear to revisit. She had not been here in 5 years, but the cabin remembered her. The floorboards still creaked in the same places. The stone fireplace still drew smoke up the chimney with a soft, hungry whisper. The bedroom where she had slept as a child still smelled faintly of cedar and old books. It was the perfect place to disappear. 3 months had passed since the night at St. Augustine Hospital. 3 months since she had loaded a dying man into a stolen van and driven through the darkness with nothing but fear and determination to guide her. 3 months since she had left behind everything she knew and stepped into a world she did not understand. Now on a cold morning in late spring, Meredith stood on the cabin's front porch and watched the mist rise from the valley below. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine needles and the distant promise of rain. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. Behind her inside the cabin, she could hear Gideon moving around the kitchen. The sound of coffee brewing, the clink of mugs, the uneven rhythm of his footsteps as he navigated the narrow space with his damaged leg. He was walking now. Not well, not without pain, but walking. The infection had retreated under the assault of antibiotics she had brought from the hospital. The wounds on his leg had closed, leaving behind a network of scars that would never fully fade. His body was recovering. His mind was another matter. The nightmares came every night. She heard him through the thin walls, crying out in his sleep, fighting battles that had ended 3 years ago, but would never truly be over. Some mornings he woke drenched in sweat, his eyes wild and unseeing, and she had learned to approach him, slowly speaking in a low, calm voice until he remembered where he was. She had become his nurse, his caretaker, his anchor to the present. And somewhere along the way, without either of them intending it, she had become something more. A partner, a co-conspirator, a woman standing on the edge of a cliff preparing to jump. The screen door creaked open behind her. Gideon limped out onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her without a word and stood beside her, looking out at the endless forest. He had changed in these 3 months. The wild desperation she had seen in the hospital was gone, replaced by a quiet intensity that burned like embers beneath ash. He had let his hair grow out and a thick beard now covered his jaw. He looked less like a patient and more like what he truly was. A man who had been to war and survived. A man who was preparing to go to war again. "Rain's coming," he said, nodding toward the clouds gathering over the western peaks. "Tonight, maybe, or tomorrow morning." They stood in comfortable silence, drinking their coffee. This had become their ritual. Every morning before the work began, they took these few minutes to simply exist, to breathe, to remember that they were still alive. "I've been thinking," Meredith said, "dangerous habit, about Blackwood, about what comes next." Gideon's jaw tightened. She saw the muscles flex beneath his beard, the subtle shift in his posture. Even now, 3 months removed from that night, the name still had power over him. "And what have you decided? That waiting isn't working?" She turned to face him. "We've been hiding up here for 3 months, living off the grid, staying off the radar. But hiding doesn't change anything. Blackwood is still out there. His company is still operating. And sooner or later, he's going to find us. So what do you suggest? We stop running. We go on offense." Gideon was quiet, then he nodded slowly. "I was wondering when you'd say that." Inside the cabin, the main room had been transformed. What had once been a simple living space was now a war room. Maps covered the walls, held in place with push pins and strips of tape. Photographs were arranged in clusters, connected by lines of red string. A laptop sat on the table, its screen filled with spreadsheets and satellite images. Meredith had been busy during these 3 months. While Gideon recovered, while his body knit itself back together, she had been gathering information, tracking patterns, building a case. It had started with the phone records. As a former 911 dispatcher, Meredith knew how emergency systems worked. She knew how calls were logged, how recordings were stored, how the chain of custody functioned. And she knew that somewhere in the archives of the County Emergency Services Department, there existed a recording of the night that had changed everything. Getting access to those records had required creativity. She had called in favors from former colleagues. She had posed as a researcher, conducting a study on response times. And she had spent weeks learning the basics of computer security, studying online tutorials, practicing on old systems, building her skills one painful step at a time. Gideon had help when he was strong enough. He knew people who knew people, former military contacts, security consultants who operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal. He taught her how to think like someone who wanted to hide information and therefore how to find it. What she uncovered had made her sick. The recording of her call with Gideon was there exactly as she remembered it. 2 hours of terror and desperation captured in digital clarity. But there was another recording too, a conversation between her former supervisor, Harold Vickers, and an unknown caller. A conversation that had taken place 17 minutes before Meredith dispatched the ambulance. In that recording, Vickers received instructions, clear, specific instructions. Delay the response. Keep the ambulance away until confirmation is received. And in exchange, a payment would be made to an offshore account. The voice giving those instructions was smooth, cultured, unmistakable, Warren Blackwood. Meredith had listened to that recording over and over, memorizing every word, every inflection, every pause. And each time she listened, the guilt that had lived inside her for 3 years transformed into something else, something harder, something sharper. Rage. She had been a pawn, a tool, a useful idiot who followed orders without questioning them. But she was not going to be a pawn anymore. "Show me what you've found," Gideon said, settling into a chair at the table. His injured legs stretched out in front of him, still stiff, despite the weeks of physical therapy. Meredith pulled up a series of documents on the laptop screen. "Blackwood Freight Lines," she said. "On paper, it's a legitimate trucking company. 1,700 employees, 300 trucks, distribution centers in 12 states. Revenue of $400 million last year. And off paper, that's where it gets interesting." She clicked to a new screen. "I found these shipping manifests in a database that Blackwood probably thought was secure. They show deliveries to locations that don't match any of their official routes, warehouses that don't appear on any maps, cargo that's listed as miscellaneous goods with no further description." She pulled up a photograph. It showed a truck stop somewhere in the Southwest, the kind of anonymous facility that dotted the highways like concrete tumors. In the photo taken from a traffic camera, a Blackwood freight truck was parked beside a nondescript van. Men were transferring something from the truck to the van, something that looked like cargo containers. "I cross-referenced these unofficial deliveries with police reports from the same areas," Meredith continued. "Missing persons cases, disappearances, young women mostly, some men, all of them vanishing without a trace." Gideon's face had gone pale. "You're saying Blackwood isn't just running drugs?" "I'm saying the drugs are a side business. The real money is in something else." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Human trafficking. He's moving people across state lines, probably selling them to the highest bidder. That's why your friends had to die. They didn't just see a drug deal. They saw a human being transported like cargo." The cabin fell completely still. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Gideon closed his eyes. His hands resting on the table curled into fists. She could see the muscles in his jaw working the tendons in his neck, standing out like cables. "Wrench," he said softly. "He said he saw a woman in the van. He said she looked scared. I told him to keep riding. I told him it wasn't our business." "It wasn't your fault. I could have stopped. I could have done something. And they would have killed you right there." Meredith reached across the table and placed her hand over his fist. "You didn't fail them. Blackwood did this, and now we're going to make him pay." Gideon opened his eyes. They were bright with unshed tears, but behind the grief she could see something else, a cold, hard determination that matched her own. "How?" he asked. Meredith turned back to the laptop. "This is where it gets complicated." She pulled up a blueprint. It showed a sprawling complex of buildings surrounded by fences and guard towers. A corporate headquarters that looked more like a military installation than a business office. "Blackwood Freight Logistics Center," she said. "Rural Virginia, about 2 hours outside Washington, D.C. This is where they keep their servers, all the real records, the financial ledgers, the shipping manifests, the communications logs, everything we need to bring them down. And it's guarded like Fort Knox. Electric fences, armed patrols, thermal cameras, biometric scanners." Meredith nodded grimly. "But there's a window. One night a year when security is relaxed enough for us to get inside. She clicked to a new image. It showed a crowded ballroom filled with men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns. A banner over the stage read Blackwood Foundation Wounded Heroes Gala. Every spring, Blackwood hosts a charity fundraiser at the Logistics Center. It's a big deal. Politicians, celebrities, corporate donors, all coming to celebrate America's veterans while drinking champagne and patting themselves on the back. The irony was not lost on either of them. A man who had ordered the murder of bikers using his charity gala for wounded warriors as a cover for his crimes. During the gala, the security focus shifts to the event itself. The server room in the basement is staffed by a skeleton crew. If we can get in, we can access the servers, download the evidence, and upload it to every major news outlet in the country before Blackwood even knows we're there. Gideon studied the blueprint. How do we get in some? I'm still working on that, but I have some ideas. She pulled up another document. This one showed a list of vendors and contractors who had worked the previous year's gala. Catering companies, security firms, transportation services. Every event like this requires outside help. Servers, bartenders, cleanup crews. People who come in, do their jobs, and leave without anyone looking twice at them. If I can get us credentials, you, Gideon interrupted. What you said us. But let's be realistic here, Meredith. I can barely walk without limping. I can't run. I can't fight. If something goes wrong in there, I'm a liability. You're not a liability. You're my backup. I'm a broken down biker with a shattered leg and enough PTSD to fill a textbook. He shook his head. If you're going to do this, you need to be prepared to do it alone. Meredith stood up and walked to the window. 3 months ago, I was a nurse who couldn't even stand up to a supervisor who told her to delay an ambulance. I was so afraid of losing my job that I let people die. I was weak, pathetic. She turned to face him. I'm not that person anymore. These 3 months, everything you've taught me, the shooting, the fighting, the way you see the world, it changed me. I know how to handle myself now. I know how to plan. I know how to adapt. She walked back to the table and sat down across from him. But I can't do this without you, not because I need you to fight, because I need you to remind me why I'm fighting. I need you to keep me grounded, to keep me from becoming like them. Gideon looked at her, then slowly a thin smile crossed his weathered face. You know, when I first saw you in that hospital room, I thought you were just another nurse coming to stick me with needles. And now I think you might be the most dangerous person I've ever met. Is that a compliment? It's the truth. They sat in a moment of quiet understanding, the weight of what they were planning, settling over them like a shroud. Then Gideon reached across the table and picked up a piece of paper from the stack beside the laptop. What's this? Meredith glanced at it and felt her stomach tighten. That's the other thing I need to tell you. The paper was a printout from a news website. The headline read, Local man found dead in apparent suicide. Beneath the headline was a photograph. A man in his 40s with a thick build and a shaved head. Otis gone. He was wearing a leather vest over a flannel shirt, and even in the grainy newspaper photo, Meredith could see the patch on his chest. A skull with wings, the emblem of the Iron Wraiths. Boone Sutton, Gideon said. His voice had gone flat. Deacon. They found him 3 days ago, hanging in his garage. The police are calling it suicide. PTSD from the accident. Depression. The same story they always tell. Gideon's hands were shaking. Deacon didn't kill himself. That man had 3 kids. He was paranoid as hell after the accident, always looking over his shoulder, but he would never have left his children. Never. I know. They got to him. Gideon's voice cracked. Blackwood's people got to him, and they made it look like suicide, just like they tried to do to me. Meredith nodded slowly. You're the last one, Gideon. The last surviving witness from that night, and they're coming for you. She watched the emotions play across his face. Grief, rage, fear, and beneath it all, a terrible burning guilt. I should have warned him, he said. I knew they would come for him eventually. I knew, and I did nothing. You were recovering. You were barely alive yourself. That's not an excuse. He slammed his fist on the table, sending papers scattering. Wrench. The others who died on the road. And now Deacon. How many more people have to pay because of what we saw that night? Meredith leaned forward. No more, she said. It ends now. We're not hiding anymore. We're not waiting for them to find us. We're going to find them first. She pulled up a calendar on the laptop. The gala is in 2 weeks. We have 14 days to prepare. 14 days to get inside that building, access those servers, and expose everything Blackwood has done. And if we fail, then we're dead, but at least we'll die fighting instead of hiding in the woods like animals. Gideon considered her words. He looked at the photograph of Deacon. He looked at the blueprints of the logistics center. He looked at the maps and the documents and the months of work that Meredith had poured into this plan. Then he looked at her. Okay, he said, tell me what you need me to do. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Every morning, Meredith ran through the forest building, her endurance pushing her body past limits she had never known existed. Every afternoon, she practiced at the makeshift shooting range Gideon had set up behind the cabin, firing round after round until her arms ached and her ears rang even through the protective muffs. Every evening, they sat together at the table and refined the plan. Meredith obtained credentials through a contact she had cultivated online. A woman who worked for a catering company that had been contracted for the previous year's gala. For $5,000 in cash delivered via anonymous courier, the woman provided 2 employee badges and uniforms that would allow Meredith and Gideon to move through the event without raising suspicion. She studied the building layouts until she could navigate them in her sleep. She memorized the security rotation schedules. She identified the location of every camera, every sensor, every potential obstacle. Gideon, for his part, focused on what he knew best: tactics, combat, the art of violence. If something goes wrong, you need to be ready to fight your way out, he said one afternoon as they stood in a clearing behind the cabin. He held a wooden training knife in his hand, demonstrating a series of defensive moves. Don't think, react. Your body knows what to do. Trust it. He came at her, the knife sweeping toward her midsection. Meredith blocked the strike, redirecting his arm and stepping inside his guard. She drove her elbow into his chest, not hard enough to hurt him, but hard enough to make her point. Good, he said, stepping back. Again. They trained until the sun set and the mosquitoes drove them inside. Then they ate dinner in silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts, both of them knowing that the clock was ticking. 3 days before the gala, Meredith made a discovery that changed everything. She had been digging through Blackwood Freight's financial records, looking for anything that might help them once they accessed the servers. What she found was a series of wire transfers totaling millions of dollars. The money had been routed through a maze of shell companies and offshore accounts, but the final destination was always the same: a private security firm based in Eastern Europe, a firm that specialized in personnel acquisition. She followed the trail deeper, using techniques that Gideon had taught her during their long evenings together. What she found made her blood run cold. Manifests, hundreds of them, each one documenting the transport of human cargo. Names, ages, physical descriptions, prices paid, women, children, men, all of them bought and sold like livestock. All of them shipped across borders and state lines in Blackwood's trucks, hidden among legitimate cargo. The scale of it was staggering. Thousands of people over the course of a decade, billions of dollars in profits. And at the center of it all, Warren Blackwood, sitting in his office in Virginia, counting his money, while human beings were traded like commodities. Meredith stared at the screen until her eyes burned. Then she closed the laptop and walked outside into the night. The sky was clear, filled with more stars than she had ever seen in her life. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out its mournful cry, echoing through the darkness. She stood there, breathing the cold mountain air, trying to process what she had learned. This was bigger than she had imagined. Bigger than justice for Wrench and Deacon and the other bikers who had died. This was about stopping a monster who had built an empire on human suffering. She heard footsteps behind her. Gideon's uneven gait, the slight drag of his injured leg against the wooden planks of the porch. "You found something," he said. It was not a question. Yes. Bad. Worse than bad. She turned to face him. "This isn't just about what happened to your friends, Gideon. This is about hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all of them bought and sold by Blackwood." Gideon stood motionless. Then he nodded slowly. So we're not just looking for evidence anymore. No, we're looking for a way to bring down the whole operation. That's a lot bigger than what we planned. I know. She met his eyes. Are you still with me? He answered without pause. Until the end. The morning of the gala docked in, cold and clear. Meredith woke before sunrise, her heart already racing. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through the plan one final time. Get in, find the server room, download the files, upload them to the journalist she had contacted. Get out, simple in theory, potentially fatal in practice. She got up and dressed in the catering uniform she had obtained. Black pants, white shirt, black bow tie. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she had applied enough makeup to alter her appearance without being obvious about it. She looked at herself in the mirror. A stranger stared back, a woman she did not recognize. Good. That was the point. Gideon was already waiting in the main room when she emerged. He was dressed in a similar uniform, though his bulk made the outfit look strained at the seams. His beard had been trimmed short, and he had dyed his hair a lighter shade of brown. He looked at her and nodded. You ready, No, she said honestly, but that's never stopped me before. They loaded the van with the equipment they would need. Laptop, portable hard drive, encrypted communication devices, and concealed beneath the catering supplies 2 handguns that Gideon had acquired through contacts he refused to discuss. Remember, Meredith said as she started the engine, we're going in as servers. Our job is to blend in to be invisible. No one looks twice at the help. And if they do, then we improvise. The drive to Virginia took 2 days. They stopped at anonymous motels along the way, paying cash using fake names. Meredith barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces from the manifests. The women, the children, the ones who had been sold into darkness. She thought about what Blackwood had done, the casual cruelty of it, the industrial efficiency. He had treated human beings like inventory, managing their lives and deaths with the same cold calculus he used for his legitimate shipping business. And no one had stopped him. No one had even tried. But that was about to change. The Blackwood Freight Logistics Center sat on 200 acres of Virginia countryside, surrounded by forests and farmland. From the outside, it looked like any other corporate campus. Glass and steel buildings, manicured lawns, a fountain in the main courtyard. But Meredith knew what lay beneath the surface. The server rooms, the secure communication center, the records of every crime Blackwood had ever committed. They arrived at 4 in the afternoon, 6 hours before the gala was scheduled to begin. The parking lot was already filling with catering trucks and supply vehicles. Men and women in uniforms moved back and forth carrying equipment, setting up tables, preparing for the night ahead. Meredith parked the van in the service area and cut the engine. Last chance to back out, she said. Gideon looked at her. His eyes were calm, steady, the eyes of a man who had made peace with whatever was about to happen. I stopped backing out a long time ago, he said. Let's do this. They stepped out of the van and walked toward the loading dock. Their badges hung around their necks. Their faces were blank, professional, forgettable. No one gave them a second glance. As they entered the building, Meredith felt a strange calm settle over her. The fear was still there, coiled in her stomach like a snake. But it was distant now, manageable. She had spent 3 years running from the past, 3 years hiding from the guilt that had consumed her. But she was not running anymore. She was hunting. The ballroom of the Blackwood Freight Logistics Center gleamed like the inside of a diamond. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prismatic light across the polished marble floor. Tables draped in white linen surrounded a central dance floor where a string quartet played something soft and classical. The air smelled of expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and the subtle corruption that always accompanied great wealth. 300 guests filled the space. Men in tuxedos that cost more than most Americans earned in a month. Women in evening gowns that glittered with diamonds and emeralds. Politicians whose faces appeared regularly on cable news. Corporate executives whose decisions affected millions of lives. All of them gathered to celebrate the Blackwood Foundation's commitment to America's wounded warriors. The irony was so thick, Meredith could taste it. She moved through the crowd with a tray of champagne glasses balanced on her palm. Her movements were precise, professional, invisible. She was nobody. Just another server in a sea of servers bringing drinks to people who would never remember her face. But beneath her white shirt, pressed against the small of her back, she carried a portable hard drive. And in her ear, concealed by her hair, she wore a tiny communication device that connected her to Gideon. He was positioned near the service entrance, dressed in the uniform of a security contractor. His job was simple: watch, wait, and if everything went wrong, create enough chaos for Meredith to escape. She hoped it would not come to that. Status, she murmured, barely moving her lips as she passed through a cluster of guests. All clear on my end. Gideon's voice crackled in her ear. Security rotation just passed. You have 12 minutes before the next sweep. Copy that. She set the empty tray on a side table and slipped through a door marked staff only. The corridor beyond was quieter, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. Anyone who saw her would assume she belonged there. Confidence, she had learned, was the best disguise. The elevator to the basement level was at the end of the hall. She swiped her badge against the reader and held her breath. The light turned green. The doors slid open and Meredith stepped inside. As the elevator descended, she felt the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her shoulders. 3 years of guilt, 3 months of planning. Everything had led to this moment. The doors opened onto a corridor that looked nothing like the opulent ballroom above. This was the guts of the operation. Bare, concrete walls, exposed pipes running along the ceiling, the hum of massive cooling fans that kept the servers from overheating. She moved quickly now, following the mental map she had memorized during the weeks of preparation. Left at the first junction, right at the second. Through the unmarked door at the end of the hall, the server room was exactly as the blueprints had shown. Rows of black towers stretched into the darkness, their lights blinking in endless patterns of blue and green. The air was cold, refrigerated to keep the machines running at optimal efficiency. The only sound was the soft whir of fans and the distant thump of music from the party above. Meredith approached the main terminal. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled the hard drive from beneath her shirt and connected it to the port. I'm in, she whispered. Timer's running, Gideon replied. 9 minutes. The screen in front of her flickered to life. Lines of code scrolled past too fast to read. The encryption protocols were military-grade, designed to keep out exactly the kind of intrusion she was attempting. But Meredith had prepared for this. During the long weeks at the cabin, she had studied Blackwood's security systems until she understood them better than the people who had designed them. She knew the vulnerabilities. She knew the back doors. She began to type. The first firewall fell in 30 seconds. The second took a minute. By the time she reached the third, sweat was beading on her forehead despite the cold. 6 minutes, Gideon said. I know. The third firewall crumbled, and suddenly she was inside. The files spread out before her like the pages of a nightmare. Financial records, shipping manifests, communications logs, and buried deep in the system, hidden behind layers of encryption that would have taken years to crack without the right access, she found what she was looking for. The human trafficking database. Names, photographs, dates, locations, prices, thousands of entries spanning more than a decade, each one representing a human being who had been bought and sold like merchandise. Each one a life destroyed by Warren Blackwood's greed. Meredith initiated the download. The progress bar crept forward with agonizing slowness. 4 minutes. Almost there. She watched the numbers climb. 40%, 50, 60. The download complete, she began the upload. The files would go to every major news organization in the country. The New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, and copied to the FBI's Cyber Crimes Division with a detailed explanation of what they were looking at and how it had been obtained. By morning, Warren Blackwood's empire would be ashes. 2 minutes. You need to move. Upload is at 80%. Meredith. I'm not leaving without this. 90%, 95. The lights in the server room flickered. Meredith froze. That was not supposed to happen. Gideon, something's wrong. I see it. Security just went to high alert. They know you're in there. 100%. Upload complete. Meredith yanked the hard drive from the port and turned toward the door. She had taken 2 steps when the lights went out, entirely plunging the room into absolute darkness. The hum of the servers continued. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Then the emergency lights kicked in, bathing the room in a dim red glow. And standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the crimson light, was a figure she recognized. Warren Blackwood. He looked different from the last time she had seen him unconscious on the floor of the hospital basement. He was wearing a tuxedo now, immaculately tailored, with a red pocket square that matched the emergency lights. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his smile was perfectly charming, and in his right hand he held a gun. "Miss Callahan," he said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I was hoping you would come." Meredith's hand moved toward her own weapon, but Blackwood raised his gun slightly, his smile never wavering. "I wouldn't. My men have the building surrounded. You wouldn't make it 10 feet. She stopped. Her mind was racing, calculating options, looking for a way out. "You knew," she said. "Of course I knew. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when someone started poking around in my files? I've been watching you for weeks. The cabin in Montana, the training, the contacts you cultivated to get inside this building." He shook his head almost sadly. "You're clever, Miss Callahan. I'll give you that. But you're playing a game you don't understand. I understand enough. I know about the trafficking. I know about the people you've bought and sold. I know about the bikers you murdered to keep your secret. And what good does knowing do you?" Blackwood stepped into the room, the gun still trained on her chest. "You've uploaded some files. Congratulations. Do you think that matters? Do you think the authorities will actually do anything? I have senators in my pocket, judges, federal prosecutors. By the time anyone even looks at those files, they'll be buried so deep they might as well not exist." Meredith felt her hope crumbling. He was right. She had known from the beginning that the evidence alone might not be enough. The system was corrupt. The people who should have been guardians of justice were complicit in the very crimes they were supposed to prevent. But she had not come this far to give up. "Even if you're right," she said, "even if you can make the files disappear, you can't make me disappear. You can't make Gideon disappear. We'll keep talking. We'll keep fighting. Sooner or later, the truth will come out." Blackwood's smile faded. "You misunderstand the situation, Miss Callahan. You're not leaving this building. Neither is your biker friend." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, a remote control with a single red button. "I've spent 30 years building this empire. Do you really think I would let it all come crashing down because of a nurse and a crippled motorcycle thug?" Meredith stared at the device. A cold knot formed in her stomach. "What is that insurance?" Blackwood pressed a button on the side of the remote. Somewhere in the building, a series of soft clicks echoed through the ventilation system. C4 charges, 12 of them, positioned at the structural supports throughout the facility. One press of this button and the entire building comes down. There are 300 people upstairs. Collateral damage. He shrugged as if discussing the weather. Tragic, of course, but necessary. The official story will be domestic terrorism, a radical environmental group perhaps, or maybe some disgruntled veterans seeking revenge. The investigation will go on for years and find nothing conclusive, and I will be the grieving hero who survived the attack that killed so many innocent people. Meredith's mind was racing. She needed to stall, needed to buy time. "You would really kill 300 people just to cover your crimes?" "I would kill 3,000 if necessary." His eyes were flat, dead, the eyes of a man who had long ago sold whatever soul he might once have possessed. "You don't build an empire by being squeamish, Miss Callahan. You build it by being willing to do what others cannot. The strong survive. The weak are consumed. That's not cruelty. It's nature." The door behind Blackwood burst open. Gideon came through like a force of nature, his injured leg, forgotten his face, a mask of cold fury. He had a gun in his hand and he fired twice before Blackwood could react. The shots went wide, shattering a server tower in a shower of sparks. Blackwood dove behind a console, his own weapon barking in response. The bullet grazed Gideon's shoulder, spinning him against the wall. "Gideon!" Meredith screamed, "I'm fine, get down!" She dropped to the floor as gunfire erupted around her. The server room became a chaos of muzzle flashes and ricocheting bullets. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Alarms began to wail, adding to the cacophony. Gideon advanced using the server towers as cover. He fired methodically, each shot forcing Blackwood to retreat further into the maze of machines. "Give it up, Blackwood. It's over." "It's not over until I say it's over." Blackwood's voice echoed through the room. He was near the far wall now, his back against a console. In his hand, the detonator glowed with a faint red light. Meredith saw it, saw his thumb hovering over the button. If he pressed it, everyone died. 300 innocent people. Gideon, herself, all of it erased in a single moment of destruction. She had to do something. Her eyes scanned the room looking for anything she could use. And then she saw it. Running along the ceiling directly above Blackwood's position was a massive red pipe. Fire suppression system. Pressurized water and chemical foam designed to extinguish any blaze before it could spread. She looked at Gideon. He was bleeding from the shoulder wound, but his eyes were clear, focused. He followed her gaze to the pipe, and understanding passed between them without a single word. He nodded once. "Hey, Blackwood!" Gideon shouted, stepping out from behind his cover. He held his gun at his side, making no move to raise it. "You want to blow this place, go ahead. But you're going to look me in the eye when you do it." Blackwood emerged from behind the console, the detonator clutched in his fist. His tuxedo was torn, his silver hair disheveled. But his smile was back cold and triumphant. How noble! The wounded warrior facing death with dignity. I almost admire it. "I've been dead for 3 years," Gideon said. "You killed me on that highway. Everything since then has been borrowed time. Then let me put you out of your misery." Blackwood raised the detonator. His thumb moved toward the button, and Meredith shot the pipe. She had grabbed Gideon's backup weapon from where it had fallen during the fight. Now she aimed at the massive red cylinder overhead and squeezed the trigger 3 times. The pipe exploded. A jet of pressurized water and chemical foam blasted downward with the force of a cannon. It struck Blackwood like the fist of God, driving him to the floor, ripping the detonator from his grip. The device skittered across the concrete and vanished into a drainage grate. Meredith was moving before Blackwood hit the ground. She kicked the gun from his hand, sent it spinning into the darkness. Then she stood over him, her own weapon pointed at his face. He lay on the floor, soaked and gasping. The chemical foam clung to his tuxedo, his hair, his skin. He looked up at her with eyes that were no longer dead. They were filled with fear. Real fear. The fear of a man who had finally met something he could not control. "It's over," Meredith said. Gideon limped over to stand beside her. He was clutching his wounded shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. But his eyes were fixed on Blackwood with an intensity that bordered on madness. "Give me the gun," he said. Meredith looked at him. "Give me the gun, Meredith. Let me finish this." She understood. She understood the rage burning inside him. The years of grief, the friends he had lost, the nightmares that haunted his sleep. Warren Blackwood had taken everything from him, and now finally he had the chance to take something back. Justice, revenge, whatever you wanted to call it. She handed him the weapon. Gideon pressed the barrel against Blackwood's forehead. His finger curled around the trigger. His hand was steady. His eyes were cold. "This is for Wrench," he said. "For Deacon, for all the others you murdered." Blackwood closed his eyes. His lips moved in what might have been a prayer. Meredith watched the scene unfold. She saw Gideon's finger tightening on the trigger. She saw the resolution in his face, the absolute certainty that this was the right thing to do. And she spoke. "Don't." The word hung in the air. Gideon's eyes flickered toward her, confusion breaking through the cold mask of his rage. "What? Don't shoot him. After everything he's done, after everyone he's killed." Meredith stepped forward. She placed her hand on Gideon's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles, the trembling that came from holding back 3 years of grief and fury. "I know," she said softly. "I know what he did. I know what he deserves. But if you pull that trigger, you're giving him what he wants. He wants to die. He wants to escape." She looked down at Blackwood, who was watching them with desperate eyes. "Think about it. If he dies here tonight, what happens? He becomes a victim, a casualty of the attack he planned. His secrets die with him. His empire passes to someone else. And nothing changes." Gideon's jaw tightened. "But if he lives," Meredith continued, "if he goes to trial, if he faces justice in front of the whole world, everything changes. The files I uploaded, they're already spreading. By morning, every news outlet in the country will have them. Every reporter, every prosecutor. There's no burying this. There's no making it go away." She squeezed his arm. "He'll spend the rest of his life in a cell. He'll wake up every morning knowing that everything he built, everything he killed for has been destroyed. By a nurse and a biker. By the people he thought were nothing. That's not just justice, Gideon. That's karma, the hardest kind. Gideon stared at her. His hand was still steady on the gun. His finger was still on the trigger. But something had changed in his eyes. The cold fury was giving way to something else. Something that might have been understanding. He killed my friends, he said, his voice cracking. I know. And I let them die because I was too weak to stand up to a man who told me to wait. We both have blood on our hands. She met his gaze. But we don't have to add more. We can end this differently. We can be better than him. Neither of them moved. The only sounds were the dripping of water from the shattered pipe and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Then Gideon lowered the gun. He stepped back from Blackwood, his shoulders slumping, the rage draining out of him like water from a broken vessel. He looked exhausted, empty, but also somehow free. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. Meredith took the gun from his hand. She ejected the magazine and cleared the chamber, then set the weapon on the floor. Blackwood was still lying on his back, staring up at them with an expression of disbelief. You're not going to kill me. No, Meredith said. I'm going to let you live, and that's going to be so much worse. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The familiar sound of the dispatch operator's voice filled her ear, and she remembered another time, another version of herself sitting in a call center following orders she knew were wrong. But she was not that person anymore. This is Meredith Callahan, she said. I'm at the Blackwood Freight Logistics Center in Virginia. There's been an attempted terrorist attack. The perpetrator is in custody. You'll need to send the FBI and bring a lot of handcuffs. She hung up and looked at Gideon. Let's go. We're just going to leave him here. The police are coming. The evidence is uploaded. Our job is done. She helped him toward the door, supporting his weight on her shoulder. Behind them, Warren Blackwood lay on the floor of his own server room, surrounded by the blinking lights of the machines that had made his empire possible. He was crying. Meredith did not look back. They emerged from the building into the cool Virginia night. The gala had been evacuated, and guests in evening wear stood in clusters on the lawn, looking confused and frightened. Police cars and fire trucks were pulling into the parking lot, their lights painting the scene in alternating shades of red and blue. No one stopped them as they walked toward the service area where the van was parked. They were just two more bodies in the chaos, two more faces in the crowd. They climbed into the van, and Meredith started the engine. Where are we going? Gideon asked. Way, she said. Somewhere quiet, somewhere we can figure out what comes next. He nodded and leaned back in his seat, his eyes closing. Meredith. Yeah, thank you. She glanced at him. His face was pale, drawn with pain and exhaustion. But there was something else there, too. Peace, a quiet contentment she had never seen in him before. For what? For stopping me, for reminding me that I'm not just a killer, for being the voice in my ear when I needed it most. She reached over and took his hand. That's what partners are for. They drove through the night, leaving the chaos and the sirens and the shattered empire behind them. The road stretched out before them, empty and endless, leading toward a future that was uncertain but no longer dark. They had won. 6 months later. The diner was small, tucked away on a quiet street in a Montana town so tiny it barely appeared on most maps. The kind of place where the coffee was always fresh, the pie was always homemade, and nobody asked questions about where you came from or what you were running from. Meredith sat in a booth by the window, watching the afternoon sunlight filter through the pine trees that lined the street. A cup of coffee sat in front of her, still steaming. Across the table, Gideon was working his way through a slice of apple pie, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked different now, healthier. The haunted look that had lived in his eyes for so long was finally beginning to fade. He still walked with a limp and probably always would. But the darkness that had consumed him was gone, replaced by something quieter. Something like peace. The television mounted above the counter was tuned to a news channel. The volume was low, but Meredith could read the scroll at the bottom of the screen. Warren Blackwood sentenced to life without parole. The footage showed Blackwood being led from a courthouse in handcuffs. His face was gaunt, aged by the months of legal battles and public humiliation. His empire had crumbled completely. The trafficking network had been dismantled. 47 victims had been rescued and reunited with their families. A dozen of his associates had been indicted, with more expected to follow. And at the center of it all, the evidence that Meredith had uploaded on the night of the gala. The files that could not be buried, could not be explained away, could not be ignored. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Carol who had worked at the diner for 20 years, refilled Meredith's coffee cup. "You folks want anything else?" Meredith shook her head. "We're good, thanks." Carol glanced at the television where Warren Blackwood's face was still filling the screen. "Can you believe that guy?" she said. "All those years running one of the biggest companies in the country, and the whole time he was doing that to people. Makes you wonder what else is going on that we don't know about." "More than we'd like to think," Meredith said quietly. Carol shook her head and moved on to the next table. Gideon finished his pie and pushed the plate aside. He looked at Meredith, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's really over," he said. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's not a dream. It's done. Thanks to you." Meredith shook her head. "Thanks to us. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You underestimate yourself." He reached across the table and took her hand. "When I met you, I was a dead man. I was lying in that hospital bed, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape, waiting to die. And then you walked in and whispered those words, and everything changed. I almost got you killed. You saved my life. You gave me a reason to keep fighting." He squeezed her hand. "You gave me something to believe in." Meredith looked at him, at the scars that lined his face, at the gray that was starting to creep into his beard, at the eyes that had seen too much pain and loss and violence but had somehow emerged with their humanity intact. "You saved me too," she said. "I spent 3 years running from what I did, from the guilt, from the person I was. I thought I could never make it right. I thought I was broken beyond repair. You're not broken. I know that now because of you, because of what we did together." She looked out the window at the street beyond, the trees, the mountains in the distance, the endless sky. "I used to think that the worst thing in the world was being responsible for someone's death," she said. "But I was wrong. The worst thing is living with it and doing nothing. Letting the guilt consume you instead of using it to become something better." "And what are you now?" She considered the question. "I'm someone who makes decisions," she finally said. "I'm someone who stands up when something is wrong, even if it's terrifying, even if it might get me killed." She turned to look at him. "I'm someone who doesn't take orders from people who don't deserve to give them." Gideon nodded slowly. "You know," he said, "when I was lying in that hospital bed fighting off the doctors who were trying to help me, I thought I was done. I thought everything that mattered had been taken from me, and there was nothing left but the anger and the pain. And now I know I was wrong. There's always something left. There's always a reason to keep going. Sometimes you just need someone to remind you what it is." He stood up, wincing slightly as his bad leg took his weight. He dropped a few bills on the table to cover the check. "Come on," he said. "Let's take a walk." They stepped out of the diner into the cool mountain air. The street was quiet, almost deserted. A few cars were parked along the curb, but there was no traffic, no pedestrians, just the two of them in the endless silence of the Montana wilderness. They walked slowly, Gideon's limp setting the pace. Meredith matched his stride without comment. She had learned to appreciate the slow moments, the spaces between the chaos where you could actually think and breathe and remember what it felt like to be human. "So what's next?" Gideon asked as they passed a small park where children were playing on an old wooden jungle gym. "I don't know," Meredith admitted. "I've spent so long focused on Blackwood, on bringing him down, that I never really thought about what comes after. You could go back to nursing. Maybe, or maybe something else, something that uses what I've learned." She glanced at him. "What about you?" Gideon was quiet. He watched the children playing, their laughter echoing across the park. "I thought about going back to the club," he said. "The Wraiths, they're still out there, still riding. They'd take me back in a heartbeat. But, but I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I can't just go back to the way things were. Too much has changed." He paused. "I've changed. Is that a bad thing?" "No, I don't think so." He turned to look at her. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I have a future. Like there's actually something worth living for." Meredith felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was not romantic. It was something deeper. The connection between two people who had walked through hell together and emerged on the other side. "I feel it too," she said. They walked in silence, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path that wound through the park. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. You know what I've been thinking about? Gideon said finally. What? That night in the Thari hospital, when you whispered those words in my ear, Highway 61, wrenches down. He shook his head slowly. I still don't fully understand how you knew, how you remembered after all that time. Meredith stopped walking. She turned to face him. I told you I was the dispatcher. I was on the phone with you for 2 hours that night. I know, but it's more than that, isn't it? You didn't just remember the words. You remembered me. You carried me with you for 3 years. She was quiet. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. When you're a dispatcher, she said slowly, you talk to a lot of people in the worst moments of their lives. Car accidents, heart attacks, house fires. You learn to compartmentalize, to separate yourself from the emotion. Otherwise, it destroys you. She looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. But some calls are different. Some voices stay with you. They become part of you, whether you want them to or not. She met his eyes. Your voice was like that. From the moment I heard you, I knew I would never forget. I knew that whatever happened, you would be with me forever. Gideon did not respond. He just looked at her, his eyes soft-filled with an emotion she could not quite name. I spent 3 years trying to run from that voice, she continued. I changed jobs, changed cities, changed everything about my life. But I could never escape it, because the truth is I didn't want to. That voice, your voice, it was my punishment, and it was also my salvation. She took a deep breath. When I saw your name on the patient list that night at St. Augustine, I knew it was fate. I knew I had been given a chance to make things right, to become the person I should have been all along. She reached out and took his hand. You asked me once why I was doing this, why I was risking everything to save a man I had never met. The answer is simple. I was not saving you. I was saving myself. Gideon held her hand, then he nodded slowly. I understand, he said. I know you do. They stood there in the fading light, two broken people who had somehow found a way to put each other back together. The past was behind them. The future was unknown. But for the first time in years, neither of them was afraid. So, Gideon said finally, a hint of his old smile returning, what do we do now? Meredith looked out at the mountains, at the endless sky, at the world that was waiting for them. Whatever we want, she said. We're free. He nodded. Free, he repeated as if testing the word. I'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Then let's remember together. They turned and walked back toward the diner, where the lights were warm and welcoming against the darkening sky. Behind them, the sun sank below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of fire and gold. And somewhere far away in a maximum security prison cell, Warren Blackwood sat alone in the darkness, staring at the concrete walls that would be his home for the rest of his life. He had lost everything. His empire, his freedom, his legacy. All of it destroyed by a nurse and a biker who should have been nothing, who should have been easy to crush. But they had not been crushed. They had risen up, they had fought back, and they had won. That was the thing about the people you underestimate, the ones you dismiss as weak, as insignificant, as beneath your notice. Sometimes they turn out to be the most dangerous people of all, because they have nothing to lose and everything to prove.